guys. Welcome to the First Responder Playbook. I am here tonight with Susan Snow. Susan is a realtor in Denver, Colorado, and I'm excited to have her here. We matched up on Pod Match, and Susan unfortunately lost her father in the line of duty as a police officer, and I absolutely want to hear um, what happened and then how Susan has overcame that to become successful and honor her father's memory. So, Susan, kind of tell me about yourself and how we ended up here.
Sure can. Well, I'm actually moving out of the real estate world. I am going into coaching.
I'm
And
actually just got my life and career coaching certification. So
that
awesome.
is awesome. I'm in the process. And it all revolved around my journey. So I am doing that. I'm a trauma resiliency coach. So that's what I do. I'm also a speaker and an author. I have been with my husband for almost 40 years, which is nuts. I have three grown kids. Won't discuss their ages. um, but this whole journey started when I was 17. My dad was a Los Angeles police detective. And with him being a detective, I kind of had a false sense of security. When he was a street cop, I always thought, even as a young girl, that, dad could get hurt because he's out there and he's in more danger. But as I got older and he became a detective, I thought he's got a desk job now. Like he comes in after the fact, there's no danger there, that kind of thing. And I had a relatively pretty normal teenage life. Um, in October of 1985, my dad was a lead detective on a case. It was a robbery ring, and he was testifying on Halloween of that year for that case. And being the teenager I am at that time, I wanted to go to a party that night. And my dad said, absolutely no, it's a school night. So the plan was that I had a 6-year-old brother at the time. That dad would leave the courthouse and go pick him up from school, and then my mom would come home, and I would schmooze the heck out of him to try to go to this party. I never got that. As I was getting ready for this party, the phone rang, and I went and I grabbed it thinking it was for me, and it wasn't. It was a lady from my brother's school, and all she said was that there was a drive-by shooting and my dad was involved. And my mom walked in the door, or walked through the door, and I handed her the phone, and I tried to listen in, but all I had to do was watch her body language, and I knew that it wasn't good. So she got off the phone and she looked at me and said, "We're going to the school." School was about 7 minutes away from my childhood home. And when we got there, it was nighttime. It was after 5 o'clock. It was dark outside. The way that the school is a church school, so there was a parking lot in the middle of the school, and the kids for after school care got out on the backside. And so that's where we headed. As we were walking, I saw two police officers walking towards us, and they both had tears in their eyes. And even though it was dark out, it was bright because of all the police cruisers that had their lights on. And then there was an ambulance that sat in the street as well. As we were walking, we kind of caught a glimpse of my dad's truck. So we started running towards the truck. As we got closer, there was glass on the ground. And as we rounded the corner, there he was, partially covered up on the side by the truck. At that point, I watched my mom collapse and start screaming, and I stood there frozen. I didn't know how to comprehend what I was looking at. And so what I did was hyper focus on that ambulance. And I kept saying to myself, why isn't anyone helping him? Soon enough, a couple of police officers came over and they grabbed our arms and escorted us back into the school. And we went into an office. And the night, it was very chaotic. There were people coming in and out. When we got to the office, I sat down and my mom was taken aside by some detectives. At this point, I had no idea where my brother was. I didn't know if he was hurt. Um, I just sat there trying to comprehend everything. And I still wasn't understanding that he was gone. It wasn't until two women who worked at the school were talking at the office, and one lady said that my dad was deceased. And that's when it hit me. Mm, I wanted to jump out of my chair and run out of that room and run as far as I could away from the scene. And the problem was is that my whole body felt like it was filled with cement and I couldn't move. So I just sat there, and my mom came up to me a little bit later and said, "I'm sending you with a neighbor." And I know, like, there was so much chaos and things going on that night, and I know I wanted to run out of there, but part of me wanted to be with my family unit. And unfortunately, I didn't get that choice. And so I did go with the neighbor. My neighborhood went from being a very quiet neighborhood to being completely filled with law enforcement. Unbeknownst to us, we were a target as well. And so we had helicopters overhead. Um, like I said, my whole street was filled with police officers. And this poor neighbor of ours had known my family for many years, and she was trying to process everything and as an adult. And here she had his teenage daughter, and I was inconsolable at that point. And all I wanted was my 19-year-old boyfriend that I had been dating for 3 months at that time. So she called him at work and didn't tell him much. So when he showed up, he was in go mode. He was like, "Grab your purse. What hospital is he at? Where's your mom? Where's your brother?" And I just couldn't spit the words out. I just absolutely could not. But the more persistent he got about leaving, I finally blurted it out. "He's gone." And he said, "What do you mean he's gone?" And I said, "He's gone. He's not at a hospital." And I watched my 19-year-old boyfriend collapse and start sobbing. And from that time on, I mean, this was mid 80s, so there wasn't any talk of mental health back then. There wasn't any resources for kids, and very little known about PTSD. In fact, back then it was called shell shock because it was attributed to people coming back from war. And so all of the emotions that I was feeling at the time, I just felt like I was in a nightmare that I couldn't get out of, and so wanted to get out of it. My dad he was my best friend. He was a very present father and man. So whether you worked with him, whether you were trained by him, whether you were married to him or he was your dad, he was very present, and he made you feel like you were the most important person in the room. And so he was also my safety net. He was the one thing, I felt safe because my dad was around and I knew he would take care of me, and now he's gone. And when I went home, you can imagine it was filled with people I had no idea who they were. Um, I passed them up. I tried to like pretend I was not there. Went straight to my room and hid, and that was the best thing I could do for myself at that very moment because I didn't want to answer any questions, and I just didn't want to talk to anybody at that point. And I was able to do that. People weren't really paying attention. Um, it took the media a couple of days to figure out he had a teenage daughter. And so, in that timing, I felt like I was not important in this scenario. If you can imagine, the last thing my dad did was to save my brother's life by telling him to duck down in the truck. So, all that focus was on him, and so be it, right? Um, that's the way it should have been. But I felt like I was pushed aside. And even with LAPD, and I've talked to them about this, I spoke at one of their conferences. And at the time, they had systems in place for the widows and the widowers. They didn't have any systems in place for the children. So they kind of didn't know what to do with us.
Right.
And it was 6 days before they found the men that were involved. This was a planned out assassination of my dad, and there were multiple men involved in the planning. So for that 6 days, I had Metro officers in my front yard, in my backyard. Um, I still had the helicopters, and then I had um, bodyguards, plainclothes police officers that followed me around wherever I went. And so, on top of losing my dad, on top of having the mental stress of it all, I was not able to grieve privately because there was always someone in my face, whether it was, a stranger in my house or the media in my face. I just didn't get a chance to grieve privately. And I know it, and I see that it happens a lot when an officer is killed in the line of duty. It's a big story. And, but at the same time, there was just so much of my world that had just completely shattered overnight. And I was just trying to cope and navigate through all of it. And my mom, I mean, the night that it happened, it was very, very chaotic. I didn't even get to see my brother that night. I heard him crying through the night, but there was nothing left of me. I could not go and console him. I could barely lift my head off the pillow. And I was kind of happy to hear him crying because then I knew that he was physically okay. I saw him the next day and I was able to hug him and tell him I love him and tell him that we're going to get through this. But that whole week was just the 6 days was a total nightmare. Even though I had all those police officers around me, I still felt unsafe. And I didn't even know. I didn't know that I was a target or that we were a target either at that time. That didn't come out until the trial. And there were two.
So how do how did y'all end up finding out that you guys were a target and this was like an assassination? You said it came out during the trial. Was it part of a case he was working, or?
Yes. Uh-huh. Yeah, he was investigating a robbery ring, and he, like I said, he was the lead detective on it. The man that actually killed my dad, um, he just had that mentality that if there's no witnesses, there's no case,
Right.
and he would get away with it. And he didn't get away with it.
Well, that's
um,
that's a positive.
yeah, yeah, for sure. Um, and so there were two trials because initially there were, I believe there were nine that were arrested. Six of them went on trial and three of them were convicted. So um, the youngest defendant, he got 25 years to life. Um, the main, the secondary man, he got life imprisonment without parole, and the man that actually killed my dad was on death row in San Quentin, but they changed all of their to life imprisonment.
Wow. So there's, a couple things that just kind of strike me at this is your mother. Um,
I know.
how did she handle? I mean, you said she was inconsolable. The days after, how did she handle it?
I think she went into handling her business mode because there's just so much that has to happen with finances and logistics and all of that stuff because the funeral itself was huge. And so just that was a big undertaking. So she kind of, how do I explain it? She just kind of turtled into herself. And that's why I was pushed aside because the assumption was I had a boyfriend and I had friends and that I was 17 and I was going to get over this. Like I was going to be okay.
Yeah.
But I was still a child,
Yeah.
you know. And I wasn't an adult and I was a child who didn't understand mental health. Um, and I never had all the feelings that I was dealing with and trying to process before. So I didn't know anything about depression. I didn't know about panic attacks and anxiety. I didn't know about suicidal ideation, which I was. I wanted to be with my dad. And my mom and I, our relationship was not healthy prior to his death. And I was terrified. I was like, how am I going to navigate this? Dad was kind of the voice of reason. So it was hard for me, to just try to navigate all of these different things that were going on around me on top of trying to grieve my dad. Um
Kind of like you said, that those a lot of those things weren't out there yet,
yeah.
and how does a 17-year-old, I'm sure, like, kind of like you said, your dad was like, your hero.
Mhm.
I can't even begin to, because my dad was in law enforcement for 40 years, and so like I can't even begin to imagine like what all you went through, and then kind of like you said, um, people were there, but they weren't there for you.
Yeah,
They were there to physically keep you safe. They didn't actually like take care of your mental health side.
right.
How long
I
did it take for you to start realizing what all was going on, and how did you start handling that?
Well, unfortunately for me, I was like, in the very beginning, I was living in a cloud. I just, if you pushed me in a certain direction, that's the direction I would go. I wasn't advocating for myself, and I certainly was not verbalizing what was going on inside of me because I felt like somebody would just stick me in a loony bin and call it a day. I felt completely out of control. And um, so my mom came to me and said LAPD was going to pay for all three of us to go to therapy. And I thought, okay, well, if you go to a therapist, you're nuts. Because that was my mentality as a teenager.
Right.
But when my mom voluntold me that I was going to therapy, I said, okay, that's what I'll do. And in hindsight, I don't think this guy was educated enough in trauma that he didn't want to dip his toes in the weeds, if you know what I mean. He didn't ask me anything about that night. And I know that's like crazy, but that's what gave me the clue later down the road that he was not capable of walking me through that. So he didn't. And our sessions were all about normal things like my relationship with my mom, my brother, my boyfriend, and school. And that was it. And every week I would go and be like, today's the day. He's going to say something, do something to help me feel better. And it didn't happen. And I saw him for an entire year. And at the end of the year, he looked at me and said, Susan, you're a well rounded young lady and you're going to be fine for the rest of your life. And I don't need to see you anymore. So I walked out of his office saying, okay, I've snapped. I'm crazy. Not even a professional can help me. So I'm just going to have to figure this out on my own.
Yeah.
And from then on, I lived in fight or flight. And freeze, definitely. I definitely created an emotional mask with the things that people would say to me. So people would say things like, you're so brave, you're so strong. And I would say, okay, I'm brave and I'm strong. And that was my emotional mask. And that's what I put out. Um, unless someone asked me, like really dove, they were not going to be privy to the information.
Right.
So I lived in the fight or flight and freeze for 14 years of my life. And in hindsight, I kind of, masking is a lot like compartmentalization.
Yep.
And I talk about this a lot with law enforcement. um, but for me, it was just a way that I could just pretend that the things around me weren't affecting me. And it also kept me from seeing things that were healthy, that, relationships that maybe that were toxic, but I molded myself to make it work. And I people pleased. And I did all of the things that you do when you're not healed.
Yep.
So I married the boyfriend and we had 2 kids when we decided to leave Southern California and move to Colorado. And in the process, I kept thinking, well, I'm just going to leave all of that behind. Like that persona is gone. She's living in California and I'm going to Colorado. So I thought I could leave my geographic area and that my problems would all go away.
Yep.
When we moved here, I was working as a hairdresser and I worked in a salon that was very close to Littleton, Colorado. And April 20th of 1999, I was working that day. I took a break and I went into the back room and turned on our little TV set, and up popped the live coverage of the Columbine shootings. And I had flashbacks. I saw the police officers, I saw the ambulance, I saw the kids at the school, and all of a sudden I was in a different world. I started to panic. I turned white as a ghost. And I didn't tell any of my colleagues. So my one colleague looked at me and was totally confused. And so was I, because I was told that I would be fine for the rest of my life.
Yep.
And she kept asking me questions. She says, I don't understand what's going on with you. And I said, I don't know. I don't know. And she said, you're too young to have kids there. You don't live in the neighborhood. And I said, yeah, I have no idea what's going on. And she left the room, and I did what I always did. I put that mask back on, and I went out and I finished my day and stayed stoic and pretended that this was just going to go away, later or tomorrow. And it wasn't going to affect me because I was hiding behind my mask again.
Yep.
And everyone around me was upset. They were angry. They were sad. I mean, all the things. And I wasn't reacting to it until I walked out the door and I got in my car. And I could feel all of it come flooding back. But it felt compounded now. It felt more intense now. And I stopped sleeping. I had panic attacks again. I started to go down the road of suicidal ideation again. And I had literal fights in my head because part of me didn't want to feel this way. But then I had babies that I didn't want to leave. And so I just felt like I was spiraling, and I didn't know what to do about it. And my very smart husband saw it happening, realized it was a slippery slope. And he met me at the door one day and he said, you have two choices. You either get help today or I'm putting you in a hospital. So at that point I was scared, and I put up the white flag and I said, okay, I'm going. I'll go to the doctor. And I made an appointment that day to go see a physician, and he put me on antidepressants because that's what they do.
Yep.
And then he handed me a business card and he said, I want you to make an appointment with this therapist. And I was like, I tried that and it didn't work 14 years ago. So what makes you think it's going to help me now? And he said, you don't have a choice. So I made the appointment. The next day I went and I saw this woman, and it said she was a trauma therapist. I knew in the first 3 minutes of sitting in her office across from her that this was different. She was finally asking me the questions that I wanted to hear a long time ago. And I felt like I was in a safe space with her. It allowed me to be vulnerable and tell her what happened when I was 17 and what I was currently dealing with. And as she sat and she listened to me, she stopped and she said, Susan, everything that you have gone through since you were 17 is normal because you have PTSD. And I kind of looked at her funny because I was like, wait a minute. I am not in the military. I didn't go to war. What are you talking about? And she said, no. She said, listen to me carefully. Anyone who goes through any kind of trauma can experience PTSD. But what you need to know is that PTSD isn't something that just goes away. It's something you learn to manage. And in that moment, I had hope. In that moment, I knew I had found my person, the person that was going to be able to help me heal, to guide me in the right way. And I was so grateful in that moment being with her and and knowing that she was my person. Um, and I finally felt like I wasn't crazy. I hadn't snapped, and that I can heal from this.
I I can sympathize with that a little bit because we there's been several of us that have went through some traumatic incidents that are close to me on the duty, and I'll never forget that one of the agencies that I was working at the time, we had a gentleman shoot himself in front of us after a pursuit, and they said, "Okay, we want you to go see a therapist." Okay. And I'd heard the horror stories. They send you to somebody with your EAP, somebody that's not trauma informed, and I never went. And my partner did. He went through. He actually ended up going through EMDR,
Mm-hmm.
and that I would say completely changed his life around
Mm-hmm.
for the better. He had some personal things going on, and ever since then, it's just like he's learned how to process those things, and he's doing 1,000 times better. But I never went, and kind of like you said, was well, I don't want to go to therapy. Why would I go to therapy? And I'll never forget. And I really don't talk about this often, but I don't mind sharing it because I'm at a point in my life that if I don't help somebody else, then what am I doing with my life? I'll never forget I was playing Xbox, just sitting at home playing NBA 2K, and I just started getting hot all over, and I started sweating, and my hands started sweating, and I'm like sitting in a 65-degree living room, and I'm like, what is
Mm-hmm.
going on with me? And it just kept getting worse, and I thought I was having a heart attack.
Mm-hmm.
And I called my parents. My parents lived like 20 minutes away, and I was like, hey, I'm 30 years old, and I think I'm having a heart attack. And they're like, "You're not having a heart attack. Like I'm telling you, I need to go to the ER." And my parents came and took me to the ER, and of course, they drew blood. And by the time I actually saw the ER doctor, it had been a couple hours, and everything was kind of back to normal. And he asked me, he says, "Have you ever had a panic attack before?" And I started laughing. I said, "Doc, I'm a doc. I'm a cop. I've never had a panic attack." And he's like, "Well, you did tonight." And I started laughing again because I'm like, "There's no way! Like, I'm not having a panic attack. Like, your tests are wrong." And then you go see your primary care doctor, and they're like, "Hey, you want to take something for anxiety?" And that's that at the time. That was their first thing was, well, let's give you medicine.
Mm-hmm.
And I did. I feel like at least in Oklahoma in law enforcement, that didn't really start changing until the last couple of years. I actually just got to go through the first half of peer support training, and I was so amazed that like there's so much out there now for us as first responders to deal with this type of stuff. That was
I am so happy to hear that because I remember having conversations with my dad, and especially with LAPD.
yeah,
Um, and he would say things like, we see the worst of the worst of the worst, right? Situations that most people wouldn't be able to deal with. And my dad was very good at compartmentalization,
yeah,
very good at it, except for it would come out on weird times. So at the dinner table, he was robbery homicide. So he would be talking about the dead body he found yesterday and what it looked like while I'm trying to eat spaghetti.
yeah,
But the other side of that is that, he said if you chose to see somebody because you were having some issues on the job, you were chastised, you were looked at as weak. And in my journey, and one of the reasons I wrote my book was for the law enforcement community, because I needed them to see that if I can heal from this, so can you.
Yep.
Um, but what I talk about is this: the compartmentalization. First of all, first and foremost, you are a human being, and human beings can only take so much before they just snap, right?
Yep.
Um, Here's the other side of that. You, as a human being, have had trauma in the past. Some of you have. I don't know if you have, but a lot of people have, right? If you are going through life and you're unhealed and you're not dealing with those things, you're going to be reactionary because things are going to trigger you on the job. Um, and so I think the most important thing for people who are first responders, police, is that they take care of their mental health first and foremost, because you are a human being and you do see really bad stuff out there and deal with really bad stuff. But if you've had past trauma that has not been dealt with and you go out onto the field, something may trigger you, and it may put you in harm's way or someone else in harm's way, right? So I feel like part of my message to law enforcement is there is nothing weak about seeking help. You are a human being with human feelings and past trauma. There's I think it's so powerful for people to take that responsibility to heal themselves, because I've talked to a lot of law enforcement about this, and a lot of them started going to therapy after the fact
Yep.
because they saw friends who took their own lives because of the job. And it woke them up and said, oh my God, I should have done this while I was on the force. And, I've had officers say to me, oh my God, if I had taken care of my mental health, I wouldn't be on my second marriage. I'd be a better dad, a better parent, whatever, right? I would have better relationships. I would be able to do my job at a higher level.
Yep.
So it's just, my message is mental health is and should be a priority no matter what.
Yep. Um, I I was I'm still trying to. I feel like sometimes we are a little bit behind in the heartland, and so that's kind of why how I ended up. I actually went through a first responder group to get my life coach certification,
Mhm.
um, because I do feel like there is a market for people to be life and career coaches with first responders, because a lot of times they won't go to therapy. They don't.
Mhm.
They don't want that stigma. But if I can help out a little bit and at least help them process a little bit of it,
Mhm.
and then if they still need that therapy, then cool. Like, let's go.
Mhm.
But a lot of times cops wait until it's too late, and
Yeah.
you're exactly right. Is well, we should have probably done this 10 years ago,
Yep.
and it's tough because you see friends, partners, people you work with, and then they don't take care of themselves right.
Yeah.
and
Well, and that's statistically, even when my dad was a police officer, that's why a lot of marriages ended. That's why there was a lot of alcoholism and drug use and different coping mechanisms that people were utilizing to just get through their day, just to numb the pain and numb what was going on. And, you know, like I said before, he was saying it was just so stigmatized. And I think I see progress within police departments finally having the mental health conversation. It's been many years in the making, but I still don't feel like you're at that point. My other my other point with mental health is that I feel like there needs to be more testing for mental health prior to somebody going to the academy.
yeah,
I feel like it's really important because, like I said, I've had conversations with vets before where they say, oh gosh, the minute we get out of the military, law enforcement is the first people at our door.
yeah,
And what they don't understand is with the military, we're trained to kill.
yeah,
And and it's a mentality that is ingrained, right? And it's not, you can't just get out of the military and deprogram yourself overnight. So you're putting someone who has had PTSD clearly, especially if they've done tours, right? And they're still working with that. And then, like this gentleman said, you don't want to give them a gun and a badge because they still got that mentality, and police officers are trained to de-escalate,
yeah,
not escalate things, right? So um, I just feel like that's a conversation that needs to happen as well. And I have some people that, push up against me on that. But here's the thing, with any kind of job, not everybody is going to be right for the job.
yep,
I don't care what you are. Not everybody is that's their job, and that's okay.
yep,
There's nothing wrong with that. It doesn't mean that you're, a bad person, a broken person or whatever. It's just that that might not be your vocation.
yep,
Um and so yeah, I mean, I feel like everyone needs a coach for therapy, especially, right now. And there's just a lot of pressures and a lot of stress and a lot of things that are going on around us. And I feel like it's really important for all of us to check in and work on our mental health and uh, you know, try to do as much as we can. And I get, I've talked to people about, I talked to an officer and, he was from New York and he was just like, that's machismo thing. It's just a bunch of bull,
mhm,
and he made me laugh, but he was just like, it took him being attacked by someone having a mental break and stabbed in the head multiple times and going blind for him to realize when he went through that it was traumatic, and they put him in therapy, and he said the same thing to me. We were both keynote speakers, and he said, you know what, Susan, I wish I had taken my mental health seriously a lot long time ago,
yep,
like in the beginning, really. Because he said, he stood up there and he said this machismo thing is bull, like
yep,
it's bull, and you're not weak if you're working on your mental health. You're actually more powerful because you
absolutely,
can really do the job at a high level and you have the tools. I think the most important thing with my journey is that now, where I'm at now, even writing my book, I didn't write my book till I was 50 years old. And I was in a place mentally where I had the tools to back me up. Um, so I knew that in writing the book, it was going to pull up a lot of different emotions. I was going to have to feel all the feels again. I was going to have to, visualize everything again. And I had the tools. On the days where I felt like I was starting to spiral, I had the tool to pull myself back out of that cavern and not allow myself to go down that road.
Yeah. Are you familiar with Stacy Lim?
Sounds familiar.
She was a LAPD officer that was shot in the line of duty
Yes.
in 1989, I believe.
Yeah, it was
Um,
after my dad. Yep.
yep. Um, I would like to get you in. She she comes and speaks to law enforcement officers, first responders. There's a program called Valor through the federal government that they go teach mental health stuff to first responders. And if you'd like, I'd like to introduce you to them,
Sure.
because they bring people like you out to speak their story of resilience and how they went through it and how they bounced back. But
Sure.
they go out and speak to just first responders, and I think your story would definitely resonate. They actually, when they came out and taught it to us, Stacy was the one that came out and talked to us,
Nice.
and it's much needed. It's 100% much needed.
It is. It is. And the one of the reasons I wrote my book was because there was so much anger and sadness around my dad's death, even to today, and it's been almost 40 years. But because of my brother, because he saved his life, um, there was just so much. And I thought if people saw me on the resiliency side, if people saw that I could heal from it, then maybe they could feel some healing themselves. And as I continued to write the book, I realized that it wasn't just law enforcement, it was other people that I needed to give this message of hope and healing and taking your power back. Um, Not giving power to the person or the thing that hurt you in the past.
Yes.
And even finding forgiveness, um, which I feel is taking your power back as well. So when I wrote the book, I had fear, obviously, about being so vulnerable and so authentic about my experiences. And my mom and I's relationship was not great when it came out, and I thought it could either break us or open a conversation. It could bring up some wounds for my husband and I. We've been through a lot in 40 years. And the other the other side of that was there were two men that were still incarcerated. The third one was paroled into 2017. But there were two men that were still incarcerated that I felt like me putting myself out there, am I going to have retaliation?
Yep.
Um, but I felt like every time that fear came up, I would just think of the faceless people out there that needed to hear the hope and that they can heal from whatever it is that they've gone through in their life, and it would allow me to just keep bulldozing forward.
Um, how did your brother handle all this?
Well, he got into some trouble as an early teen and as a young man. He got into drug use. My mom, you know, she used alcohol as a coping mechanism. And here's the thing: there's no blame in it, right? Because everybody deals with trauma differently.
Yep.
So there's no blame in it, but that was their coping mechanism. My brother dealt with a lot of survivor's guilt.
Yeah.
Even though he was 6 years old, he kept telling himself, I could have done this, I could have done that, I could have helped dad in some sort of way. And, um, he has been able to rise up from all of that. I call him my Hercules because this little boy turned into a 6'2", almost 300-pound man.
Yep. Yep.
um, who has been through hell, who has seen horrible things. He was in the military for a while, and he is now on his journey of healing, and he's doing so well. And he and I started healing our relationship 8 years ago, and so I told him, I said, you want to write a book, I'm right there with you, I can help you out, but he's just not there yet, and that's
Yep.
okay. um but yeah, he had a rough go,
I can imagine.
and connecting himself with people that were not good people,
Yep.
which got him into trouble as well. And then on the other side of that is he had police officers who felt the need to try to be his dad,
Yep.
and but in a very negative way. Um, so he's had that trauma as well,
Yep.
and which was not fair. But we've talked about a lot of this, and he, again, seeing me heal, he says to me he's very proud of me, which, like, I'm way, way proud of my brother. Like,
Yep.
I'm way, way proud. I am proud of him. I am glad that he's still on this earth.
Yep.
Because all the things he's gone through, it's a surprise. And I'm just grateful that he's still here and he still fights. And he's got a beautiful life now,
That's
and
awesome.
I'm happy for him.
And we have to celebrate those wins.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I don't want to tie you up all night.
No, it's
Um,
fine.
I've thoroughly enjoyed having you on.
Thank you.
Um, like I said, your story's just amazingly powerful. And
Thank you.
I wish I can't understand what you went through totally. I just can't. Um, but I'm so glad that you guys have eventually been able to bounce back and turn your lives to where you want to be.
Yep.
Um, if any of my listeners would like to reach out to you for coaching services or
Sure.
speaking engagements, because I think I'm going to try to get you out to Oklahoma at some point to talk to some of our cops.
I would
Uh,
love it.
where can they find you, and give us the title of your book as well, and where they can find your book.
Okay. Well, my book is called The Other Side of the Gun: My Journey from Trauma to Resiliency. It is on Amazon. It's a paperback form or Kindle. And coming soon, probably in the next couple of weeks, I will be on audio, and I just got out of the studio and did all of that myself.
It's awesome.
So I narrated myself, and so that will be on Audible as well, and I think iTunes. Um, so I'm really excited about that. And as far as getting a hold of me, I do have a website. It's susansnowspeaks.com, and it's a one-stop shop, which cops will love.
Yep.
um, it has information on my speaking. It has information on my coaching. I do offer a 40-minute discovery call to see kind of if I'm a right fit for you.
Yep.
Or, you can also reach out if you have questions. if you're just starting your journey or you're considering it or whatever, I'm an open ear. So you can message me through my website. And the website does have information on my book as well. So
Awesome. I've actually got a discovery call myself tonight. Yeah,
nice.
you have to be the right fit. You're exactly right.
Absolutely.
Susan, I thank you again for being here tonight.
Thank you for
Again,
having me.
I'm gonna send you my number on Podmatch, so that
Okay.
way you have it.
Sounds
And
good.
then if there's anything I can ever do for you, you let me know.
All right. Thank you. I
Uh,
appreciate that.
Thank you, Susan. Have a good night.
All right. You too.